Commodore 64 presents a Playguide and video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hey there, welcome to another Lemon C64 Play Guide and Review. In this week's episode we'll be checking out Outrun, developed by Amazing Products and published by US Gold in 1988. On the tape version we get a great loading picture and then it's on to the game itself. Let's press fire and check out the A route. As you can see, Outrun is a very fast rear-view driving game modelled on the Sega Arcade original released in 1986. By pushing forward on the controller we can accelerate, and by pressing that fire button we can swap between the two gears which have managed to find their way onto this Ferrari. And I'm sure Ferraris have more than two gears in real life, but this is an arcade conversion, and in the arcade we actually got two gears on the sit-down version of this game, and even on the upright, and those are simulated of course on the Commodore 64 version. You can see this first stage is reminiscent of the first stage in the arcade. The road meanders similarly, and of course stick to that racing line. If we go off, well, we'll crash out, and in this game, one crash ruins the entire game, and if we don't, we might make it to a checkpoint. The checkpoints in this game are spaced out rather evenly, and you can see even now the arcade arcs are there from the arcade machine, the arches there, which look a lot like Michelin tires on this version, but you can see the frame rate is smooth and the playability is actually maintained throughout. We can throw the car into these corners and that will skid off to the outside, and as long as there are no traffic obstacles in our way we can simply ride around those corners like we're on rails, and if we preempt those of course we'll have a smooth ride through the level. As long as we don't touch any of the traffic and of course touch any of the scenery, then we will find the game isn't too hard and it doesn't give much in the way to tax the player. All we have to do is to see those vehicles on the horizon and hopefully choose the correct lane. In this game we have 3 lanes, and of course 1, 2 or 3 will be correct at any given time. All we have to do is to select the correct lane and make it to the next checkpoint. You can see in the bottom corner we're now on stage 3 of the 5 on each of the 5 levels in this game, and even at this stage the programmers have taken liberties, because on the arcade the 3rd stage was actually a desert track, and this is not a desert track as you can see. The desert track appears in stage 4 in the Commodore 64 version, and what appears to be stage 3 here is actually stage 2 over the tracks 3 and 4, which is a little confusing, but at the end of the day you will find that some tracks are repeated unfortunately, and this is not a carbon copy of the arcade. Sometimes we can be greatly lucky in this game, weaving between the traffic just in time, and that hit detection is often great. It doesn't always register unless we are bang on target. If we are veering off the road, the very best thing we can do is to gear down like that into first gear, regain some kind of control, and then jam it back into second as soon as humanly possible. The speed in this game is achieved in second gear, and sometimes it is possible to brake and get away with that, but I find simply gearing down and then gearing up again very quickly won't lose the player a great amount of speed, and the rest of the time all they have to do is to avoid touching the back of this traffic. Each time we bump the car in front, that will lose perhaps 1 or maybe 2 seconds. So if we keep doing that repeatedly over and over, of course those seconds will be accumulated. In this game, the seconds carry over from stage to stage, so we can accrue time in this game and we can carry that over to the end of the game. There is a lot going on in this game, so sometimes you'll find variable frame rates, and sometimes when there is a lot on screen, the frame rates take a small dip, but not enough to become not smooth. And this game is very smooth. You can see how it's speeded up there with uphill sections, and we shouldn't really be speeding up when we're travelling uphill, but again, travelling uphill and downhill is great, and we didn't really get a sense of up and downhill until Lotus Challenge appeared on the Amiga. Back on the C64, the crowd will appear at the end of each stage, so as soon as you see that crowd, you are almost there, and perhaps 3-4 more seconds would have done it. But unfortunately I must have touched the back of one too many cars, and that has defeated that chance. But it is very difficult even if you don't hit anything, and of course you cannot afford to hit anything in a game like Outrun. Let's try it again, and now let's check out the B route. It's a shame the gears aren't much use in this game. Basically the player will stick in second gear unless they have an emergency, and that isn't too bad, but of course we can gear up to second pretty quickly. It's great that the car accelerates very quickly and isn't as slow to start as Speed King or Pit Stop 2, and that really adds to the speed of this game and the sense of thrill as the player really wraps around these corners. It's certainly a greater sense of speed than we ever got on the Amiga version, and I feel even the IBM PC version was not as thrilling as the C64. There isn't much on screen, but you can see clouds there disappearing with a parallax scrolling background, unbelievably, and you can also see the plant life there. Again, no waves and surfers lapping around, but who needs those when you have frame rates like this? But look at that, some of the disc versions of this game are slightly buggy, and you may have noticed there we are now on stage 3 because it appears to have skipped stage 2 altogether, and that is not an amazing feature for a disc game. And some of these are cracks, obviously the games that you can get on the internet these days, and this is probably a crack that I'm using at the moment. When I originally had this game on the tape, it did take some time before I realised that there was more than one route on the tape, and by pressing load after loading one route and trying again, it would actually load the second route. And I clearly remember showing this to another friend of mine, and he had bet that there was no such thing as the B route. He thought load a route was simply a joke on the tape, i.e. load a route, and that was supposed to be funny. But when I revealed route B, C, D and E to this guy, unfortunately he lost the bet, and I of course managed to kick his ass on this game because I had been practicing, and I really do appreciate all the different routes, and it would have been absolutely fantastic of all the games on the C64 if this game would have come on a cartridge, and then it would have loaded instantly and we had 5 routes at our disposal. But I'm not quite sure whether anybody actually put that into practice, and if they didn't, that's obviously a wasted opportunity. If you pick the wrong lane by mistake, of course it can be slightly annoying, particularly if you repeatedly select the wrong lane and the player ends up bumping the back of all this transport. But unfortunately, that is a part of the game, and if you make too many of those errors, you'll probably not find out if you have enough time to make it to the end until you get to the end. And so at this point I have no idea whether all this bumping has written off my chances already. All we can do is persevere and make it through these stages. Only one more stage to go. You can see that timer is ticking down. When we get to the end here, it gives us plenty of opportunity to gain some time. And now that we're on the final stage, the graphics change and the colour scheme changes. So just like Super Cycle, the game does have a variety of backgrounds, and I appreciate these more than Super Cycle, and of course the dire backgrounds that we found on the 64 version of Super Hang-On. But you can see everything is still smooth, those cacti are great, and the frame rate of course never slows down. You might also be able to see their extra cars, and I think those are Ferraris, and the fact that we have two types of Ferrari on the screen there, but perhaps I'm mistaken. Many of the vehicles from the arcade game are in there. Unfortunately there are no lorries, perhaps the C64 couldn't cope with lorries, but you can find a variety of vehicles from stage to stage, and that's race complete. And at the end we get to enter our name on the high score table, and it gives us a nice scrolly effect there. Once again we cannot enter the letters on the keyboard, but we can enter those in. So let's skip on. This is now the C route, and for this let's change the music. In this game, the player has to press fire when they start to change from high gear into low gear, and then push forward, and as long as the player does that, they should be able to cruise and launch off the line. If they forget to do that, of course that is the formula, and well, that is pretty similar to the arcade game perhaps. But let's see again for the third and the final time, this first stage, which is identical on each of the 5 races. The second stage will be similar on the first 2, and then the second stage, the last 3 levels, will be identical. So let's check that out. And again, the time is accumulated on this game, so if we can get through to that checkpoint with maybe 17 seconds remaining, that gives us the best possible chance and the best possible time moving on to the second stage. So let's see if we can turn that into reality, and you can see there with 17 seconds on the clock we gain 81 seconds in the next stage, and we only made 15 seconds before, which only gave us 79. So it really is worth it, and as long as the player can practice, then the rest shouldn't be as much of a problem. And again, if you can look forward and find those gaps, as long as you choose the correct lane and go for those corners, then the rest should be fairly easy. Perhaps this is one of the hardest corners in the game, with its switchback halfway through, and if you find a vehicle parked in the lane, unfortunately you will have to bump, and you can get a tremendous speed if you manage to get around that corner in one piece, but if you don't, you'll be losing time. Just like the arcade game, we find a nice level in the third stage of the C route. There is no slip-slidey action going on, and you will not slip-slide around this track and have to avoid things in the road. You can see that kind of scrolling we can see in the road is pretty distracting, so all we need to do is keep going in a straight line and hope this effect will end pretty soon. The music presented in this game features 2 tracks similar to the arcade original, and I find both of those tracks highly listenable. I guess the programmers of this game could have done away with the music to give the C64 less to do, and that might have speeded up the game even more. But I find with the music and everything playing and all the graphics whizzing by at high speed, then nothing slows down and nothing becomes jerky, which is absolutely fantastic. So the music does change, and the music is very enjoyable throughout. The player can also switch the music off and simply have sound effects, and again, unlike the Amiga version, the screeching while we are on the road isn't annoying and doesn't sound like someone trying to be sick. So the sound effects are terrific, the music is terrific, the graphics are big and bold and meaty, and sometimes these graphics are even bigger than most arcade racers on the C64, certainly faster and sometimes smoother as well. So I think for 1989 this was a breakthrough, and I find they could have done a much worse job on the C64, yet this game comes out really great, and I certainly played this more and enjoyed this more than Power Drift and of course Super Hang-On on the C64. Outrun was coded by Martin Webb, and his other game on the C64 was 1987's Max Torque, which was a bike racing game, and that's where he learnt to code these types of rear view racers. Max Torque didn't actually get a great review, and neither did Outrun come to that. The graphics were created by Dennis Webb, perhaps his brother, and the music was created by Jason Brook. Jason Brook also created the music for Ikari Warriors for Elite, Contra or Grisor as it may be known, and games like Pac-Land. Outrun was also converted by US Gold, and US Gold was a distribution team, and they basically bought up licenses and sometimes converted those in-house, but often hired guys to convert games for them, and the Probe software team are an example of that. But look at that, we failed again to make the line, and we were maybe 7 seconds away from the line there in stage 5, but we didn't have those 7 seconds because of all that bumping through traffic. So let's enter our name and let's try again. This time let's try and load the D route. And on the disk version, which I'm actually loading at the moment, you have to be very specific in the way that you load that D route, including all these spaces. And if you enter that line correctly, then it should load and run the game. So let's try that again. Let's again have the great music and press fire, push forward, watch the lights, and away we go. So it's great that the first stage is always the same and it's always very fast. And so let's skip on to the end of that. Let's see how many seconds we had going under the line. And well, 19, 17, 16, 15 seconds there, not very good. So you can see again the second stage is identical for the last 3 races, and so we'll visit this for the second and the last time. It's very novel and unique to drive around at high speed in this kind of tunnel effect, and sometimes the other cars will bump over the landscape and pop up over the horizon and jump up like Jack in the Boxes, and that's actually a very funny effect, but that actually gives us pre-warning when we see those hopping over the horizon that they will appear in that lane. Again, one simple gear down is often required, but if there is no traffic, then sometimes, well, we're lucky there. If there is no traffic, sometimes we can get through this at high speed and make up a lot of time. This being the D route, it is quite tricky, and you have to get through the first few stages without touching anything. At times, the avoiding traffic aspect can appear like a lottery, and if you don't know, these corners, well, sometimes it doesn't give the player much encouragement to get through this if they pick the wrong lane. But luckily it doesn't really put the player off, even though they are bumping on the traffic, as long as I say, they don't hit the sides, and then the player will be treated to a great rolling animation with GB printed on the bottom of this vehicle, no idea why. And I think actually the initials of the graphics coder Dennis Webb, DW, are printed on this game somewhere. In fact, you can see DW printed on the back of the Ferrari. And when we turn the Ferrari, also the horse of the Ferrari logo will change left to right and face left to right depending on the way we are moving, and I always found that to be a pretty cute and great effect. So here we go, this is stage 3. Let's follow that prancing horse around, and again making those stupid mistakes just before we go under the line. So I don't think we'll get to the 5th stage yet again, but look at those trees. Every branch there is an individual item, and that really is a great effect. So even though this game is pretty simplistic, it's the same cloud and the same hills scrolling away in the background, it's the same bushes and the same variety of vehicles. I find there is just enough on offer to make this fun. The music is great, the sound effects are great, and the overall feel of the game doesn't feel like it's unfair. So I had lots of great times playing this on my Commodore 64, and I noticed if the player has a fast 64, and each 64 is slightly different, then this game would really benefit. I've seen this game really flying on real hardware, and unfortunately on the emulation it's a pretty stock affair. So let's see if we can make it to the line. A few seconds remaining, and unfortunately not. So we don't even make it to stage 5 in that particular playthrough. So pretty damn close there, but not quite good enough. And it's great to see those scores piling up there, over 1,000,000 points. Finally, let's check out the E route, the 5th and the final route in this game. And again, let's just dive on in and check this out. Another great 17 seconds under the line. That means we can get through this stage. And let's skip again through to the end, because we've seen this stage, well, 4 times already. And that takes us on to another stage which looks pretty similar to ones we've seen already. But unfortunately, that's again the aspect of this game. It's not arcade perfect, not by a long stretch, but the programming has certainly stretched our lowly C64. In conclusion, I always found Outrun on the Commodore 64 to be a very enjoyable and fun experience. I love throwing this thing around the corners and feeling like we can just make it, just giving up or down at the last possible moment. Getting through this traffic at high speed, managing to find the right lane and being incredibly lucky. That great music and those great sound effects. So I have a lot of time and admiration for this game, even though, as I say, bumping incessantly can be quite annoying, because we lose that time and we don't have any idea if we've just bumped ourselves out of the race. But continuing on, that pink colour scheme again is great, considering the Commodore 64's limited palette. And look at that shading on those rocks there, they almost appear 3D. So I think they did a tremendous effort on this game, and I actually rate it higher than most. Taking a look at the magazine scores, your Commodore gave this 40%, Commodore Force gave it 41%, CMVG gave it 50%, Commodore User gave it 60%, the Games Machine gave it 67%, Zap gave it 68%, Ace eventually gave it 69%, and good old Commodore Format gave this game 75% in issue number 3, December 1990. And I remember having that issue, and Commodore Format is a tremendous magazine. Commodore Format said that this is fast, playable, and looks good. And that's all you can say about this game. It's fast, playable, and it's terrific. The controls are spot on, there's no lag. But unfortunately, you can see my skills are lagging because we haven't reached stage 5 again. And that means a lowly score, just over 1,000,000 points. So thank you for viewing another Lemon 64 play guide and review, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. Thank you.